Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Commander Clash podcast, where we talk all things Commander. And today we are going to see who can build the best mana base. Now, we've had a lot of debates about mana bases, about number of basics, about which MDFCs or utility lands to include. So we're gonna lay it all on the line here. We've taken two brave Patreon decks. Two Patreon members have submitted their decks, and we have rebuilt the mana base to our liking. So we're going to compare, see how it differs from their mana base, see how our mana bases differ, and then you let us know in the comments below how you would build these mana bases. So join with me today is Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive. How you doing, Seth?
I'm doing good. I've been waiting for this podcast. We've been counting down the weeks for this one, so I'm super hyped.
Tomer, budget commander. Did you just go 37 divide by 3 colors?
Yeah, I don't know if it took you all a long time or not. I was just like, okay, we'll just figure out how many colors it is, put that many basics and evenly, and it takes care of itself, really, right?
And
Why
then we
complicate things?
Morgan filling in. Tomer is back from vacation. Krim is still not. But we got Morgan representing, apparently, the champion of basics, because there's spoilers alert. Tomer doesn't have too many basics in his mana base.
I joked pre-recording that I'm never going to get invited back because even Mr. Budget Commander himself isn't up here with my basics count. So,
All right. So it should be a fun one. I've actually never seen your mana base. We play Clash like every week, but very rarely do I actually look at your deck lists and like analyze them. Like once in a while, I'll look at Phil's decks to be like, oh, what's that like disgusting like Simic finisher Phil's play? Let me double check real quick so I can put it in my deck. But otherwise, it's just kind of like by feel, by what I see on the battlefield. So it'll be an interesting look into your mana bases today. Before we get into today's show is brought to you by Ultimate Guard, premium protection for your trading cards. All the gaming accessories you see on this channel are brought to you by Ultimate Guard. So check it out at ultimateguard.com. And also Card Conduit, the easiest way to sell your Magic cards. Card Conduit lets you skip all the typing, time, and work associated with buy listing. Their curated service lets you send in as many cards as you want with buy list value of $1 or more, and you pay just a 5% service fee. You can use their sorter service where you list and sort your cards and pay only 2%. You get a detailed report and fast payment. Once your order is processed, you can get 10% off by heading over to cardconduit.com/mtggoldfish. So thank you to our sponsors, and it's time for the Ultimate Guard comment of the week. So last week, we talked about Bloomborough. So obviously, the top comment is like the best card from Bloomborough, right?
Is it a Richard hot take?
At Claymore, Richard, at 10:28, at 10:28, exact timestamp. The people say I'm a contrarian, and they are right. Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
so good.
We got him. Look, the point of a podcast is to have a discussion, right? So you need to bring both sides of the argument. Even if you don't necessarily agree with it, you need to be able to like understand the other side, right? But I always tell you what like my actual opinion is. And then I might actually like sit on the other side and talk from the other side if like the rest of the podcast is leaning, the other way, right? Because we need to have some back and forth, and it's good to understand different points. But you should all understand what my real thought is, right? Like I usually tell you what my real opinion is, and then I might argue for the other opinion for a while, just so that we get some data. Source to Plowshare still sucks, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. And I always tell people this when it comes up, because people in the stream are always like, oh, Richard's hot takes. And I always tell them, look at his deck list. Like his deck list back up the hot takes. If you were like playing swords in all your decks and saying swords sucks, that'd be one thing. But you literally never play Swords to Plowshare. So his deck lists actually back up many of his absurd hot takes.
Speaking of backing up, Tomer, number of basic lands in your mana bases have been disappointing. So we're gonna dive into it. Tomer has some good reasoning, so we're gonna dive into it today.
Yeah, you have to explain how we ended up building these mana bases. We're only changing the lands. We are not changing any other part of the deck. So all the non-land cards in the deck are being untouched. We're going to be just building for that specific deck, just the lands, nothing else. And with that said, Mr. Basics, if I built a deck including, all the non-land cards, I would add more basic synergies and thus the basic land can't go up. But because, our viewers or the 2 decks that we selected are not very basic synergy heavy, there's no reason to run that many. You got to have one for the Path to Exile.
Let's go into the rules. So we asked our Patreons for decks, and then I chose a 2-color deck and a 3-color deck because I think that's where it gets interesting. We are not allowed to change the cards in the main deck, only the lands, but we're allowed to suggest additional lands, right? So if we feel you're running like too few lands, we just added some extra lands, and it's up to you to make the cuts. But we didn't like swap out like your card draw spells or whatever to suit ourselves, right? So we are trying to build based around what you are going for in the main deck. And the first deck is a Sméagol deck from Florian Dur. So Sméagol is like an aristocracy Golgari commander, where at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died, the ring tempts you. And then when the ring tempts you, you can ramp from an opponent's top of library. Okay, and then the deck list will be in the article below, but I'll give you a quick summary of it. They're going pretty all in on mana dorks. I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mana dorks. A Steve. Steve is the only basic land matters card. So Steve is Sacred Tribe Elder. And I can see what they're doing, right? They're going to use mana dorks. They're going to power out Sméagol. And then they're going to ramp lands using Sméagol's ability. They only have 34 basics. Or not, 34 lands. They have 34 lands in their mana base, which looks a little low, but you need to factor in they're using mana dorks, and you need to factor in that their commander is Sméagol. Okay. So we're going to take a look at each mana base, starting with the original mana base. And we're going to go by like category by category, so you can kind of figure out what's going on. So I'm going to start with the original mana base, and then we'll all kind of just give our takes on the mana base, and then we'll talk about our inclusions. So 4 fetches, 1 overgrown tomb, 3 lands that tap for multiple colors or 3+ colors. In this case, it doesn't matter because it's a Golgari deck, but Command Tower, City of Brass, Mana Confluence. So 2 pain-inducing lands in this mana base. And then they actually have a Bayou in this deck. They play Pathway, Tainted Wood, Lawnmower Waste, Nurturing Peatland, Underground Stadium. So these are all 2-color lands. And then Urborg and Yavimaya. So those can be considered fixing because they fix the other color. For utility / spell lands, they have a Boseiju. They're green, so they play Field of the Dead. There's a Shizo, a Takinuma, and an Urza's Cave. Synergy lands, so something that like specifically works really well with their commanders. Phyrexian Tower, that's a land that's a sack outlet. And then 13 basics split between forest and swamp, and then snow covered and non-snow covered, and they're doing that to power up Field of the Dead. So what do we think about this mana base?
34 lands and 13 basics is wild to me. Like, that's about like 4 or 5 lands less than I would really be comfortable playing, even considering you have mana dorks and a commander that can kind of ramp. So I just wouldn't be comfortable going that low. And then when you consider you're already at 34 lands, 13 basics, that's so many. That's like a 30-year mana base, or more than a 30-year mana base is basic land. So that's the stuff that stood out to me. The other thing that stood out is apparently our viewers don't believe in MDFCs like we do, or I do at least. Like, there's a single spell land, and when you get to our mana bases, you'll see there's just this huge column of like 10 spell lands that everyone's playing. So yeah, it seems functional. There's not a lot of lands in there that I'm like, oh my god, I wouldn't play that. The 2 that I would really say I would never put in my deck would, in a 2-color deck, I don't think I would ever play City of Brass and Mana Confluence. I think that's just like, I would play a basic over those lands in a 2-color deck, and then I would not be caught dead playing a Pathway. I just hate Pathways, so that's more of a personal thing. So, but otherwise, it's all lands that I would be happy having in my deck.
Yeah. I will actually want to go to that point because I feel like what they did, they built the deck very smartly. I've seen Sméagol in action. I have a friend who plays Sméagol pretty often, And having a turn 2 Sméagol as opposed to a turn 3 Sméagol is like night and day difference in terms of tempo, momentum, and everything. That's like one more rampant growth. You could think of it like that. One more rampant growth enabling you in the early mid game, and one more rampant growth throughout the game, really. Because either you play turn 3 Sméagol normally, or if you have like that turn 1 Elf, then you can go turn 2 Sméagol, and then you can go turn 3 Nazgul, or like play a creature, sacrifice or whatever, and then you're really popping off. So it's really nice to get that turn 2 Sméagol. And I think they are just running those two lands, the City of Brass and the Mana Confluence, just to ensure that they're going to have enough green consistently to cast that Llanowar Elf. And I use like Frank Karsten math, but basically the short of it is, according to Frank Karsten, in a deck, if you want to play a Llanowar Elf on turn 1, 90% of the times, you need at least 19 sources of green that are untapped, obviously, to play it on turn 1. And they have 21 sources of green to cast a turn 1 Llanowar Elf. So I think it's actually justified there. It's a little bit silly looking, but if you want to get that Llanowar Elf on turn 1 and get that turn 2 Sméagol, these are the type of cards that are going to enable it. So I actually back the user on this one, and I usually don't for like this.
So the thing, I think philosophically you're correct that you need like a lot of green sources to be able to do the thing. Like, so I'm not arguing with the math, but I'm arguing with City of Brass Mana Confluence being the best way to achieve that goal. Couldn't you just play another fetch land which does the same thing? Couldn't you play another forest, a basic, your beloved basics tomer? You could play another forest that does the same thing. So I just don't know if the upside of needing an untapped green source makes it worth playing a land that's going to theoretically deal damage to you every single turn of the game for the rest of the game. So sure, like, I could play a forest and take 0 damage and play my Sméagol on turn 2, or I could play a City of Brass and take 10 damage throughout the game and do the same thing. So somehow this has made me come around to adding more basic lands to my deck, if that's what we need to get enough green sources on the battlefield.
Problem is they also have like a blood pet, which is black. So same thing, you know, that's how much they want the turn 2 Sméagol, and I agree with them on it. You could go turn 1 blood pet, sacrifice the blood pet on turn 2, get out your Sméagol. So this helps with it more than like a forest would in theory. But then, at least I don't
wouldn't
know.
a fetch just do it the best? Because you just get a dual land that makes both colors, and you don't take the damage. You take the damage once to crack your fetch and get an overgrown tomb or a bayou, and then you don't have to do it for the rest of the game. So wouldn't +2 fetches, -2 City of Brass Mana Confluences just be strictly better and do exactly the same thing?
Yes, in theory, if we didn't do any other changes, but as you could see with our changes, we added like 20 MDFCs, extra Field of the Dead stuff,
y'all talking too deep,
lands.
right? You're talking about turn 1 mana dork, but there are 6 swamps, right? Like there's no real reason for that, right? You can actually just keep the same ratios and convert those 6 swamps into 6 more forests to ensure the turn 1 mana dork. But also there's like other dual lands that don't ping you that are suitable for this. Like you could play the fast land here. And then you can also play like Prismatic Vista, like more fetches that are not necessarily like the 2-color fetches. But also it's not that important to play your commander on curves. Like everyone talks about like, okay, you ramp a land, you get wrath, you're still down a land, right? Like you need to set up, right? Like you need to set up, right? Like you don't need to spew everything out. Like it's okay to play more slowly, right? So, you know, I would take a more robust mana base. And then maybe you don't always have the turn 1 play, right? Because the biggest problem with this deck is you spew out your mana dorks, you play the Sméagol, then you get wrath, and then like you're donezo, right?
No,
but we can't fix that. We can't fix that. But like you don't need to like. You don't need to.
He helps pay for his own command tax. So the earlier you get Sméagol out, that's more lands you have that when eventually the wrath does happen, you get to recast Sméagol much easier and you get your engine going a lot faster.
But
like
what if you can't tempt? What if you can't tempt? What if you can't sack, right? Because like you already got him out. Like, you know, what if you just spend some turns drawing cards, you know? Like, you know, you don't always have the perfect hand, so...
You're gonna be tempted. That's the whole point of the 9 Nazgul Sméagol deck. That's what it does.
Well, so then doesn't it extra not matter to play Sméagol on curve because you want to have your setup, you want to have your sack outlet or something on board before you have Sméagol, so... I don't know. I actually don't think that having the Mana Confluence or City of Brasses is worth it just to get the turn 1 Mana Dork. Like, Commander, like, this is a perfectly playable deck. It seems quite strong. It has a lot of really strong cards, but it's not CEDH by any stretch of the imagination. You can take the tempo hit. You can play your 3 mana commander on turn 4, and you will be okay, besides the fact that you probably want the sack outlet ahead of time. And because not just those 2 lands, there's a couple other lands in here and other cards in the 99 that I'm like, you're going to kill yourself before you do anything. There's so much damage that's going to add up that I actually added a couple really sus lands that I wouldn't normally recommend, just to even out how much damage you're going to be taking from your own cards.
There's also Nurturing Peat land, which is the canopy land that also pings you. So they actually have 3 lands that just ping you every single turn.
The one that's okay, I think, is Lion War Waste, because it usually only has to ping you like once, maybe twice, and then the rest of the game it can tap for colorless. So that's nowhere near as bad.
Okay, let's go through our mana bases real quick, and then we'll go by category by category. But let's start with number of lands. So original deck 34 lands, and we all thought that was a little sus, right? So I went to 38 lands, but 6 are MDFCs and 2 don't even produce mana. Okay.
So is that really better?
So it's kind of 36 lands.
36.
It's basically 36.
So
lands.
I increased some number, right? But I still kept the essence of the deck, which is there's a lot of mana dorks, right? And they're leaning hard in mana dorks. So I didn't go to like my normal amount, because I would normally not run only 38 lands, 2 no mana. Seth 38 lands, 7 MDFCs. Important to note, original deck 0 MDFCs, by the way. Tomer 42. Like, I don't even know what's going on here. He increased the number of lands by a lot. 7 MDFCs. Morgan 39 lands, 2 MDFCs. Also important to note that Morgan does not count an MDFC as a true land. He counts it like as about half a land. Wow. But we all increased the number of lands. Tomer way so more than anyone else. Why so high, Tomer?
The thing is that there's some MDFCs in available to a Sméagol deck that are so good spell side that I actually just value them way more as a spell. One that is a big standout that I know a lot of you love because it's card draw.
Soft consumption?
No, it's Disciple of Freyalise. Disciple of Freyalise, at like 6-drop, ETB, sack a creature, then you gain life and draw cards equal to that creature's power. In a Sméagol Nazgul deck, the Nazguls get very large very, very quickly. And you also want to be sacrificing them to recur them over and over again because they have an ETB, the Ring Tempts You, which grows all the Nazgul and stuff like that. So, by like turn 5, turn 6, you have a Nazgul on the board. It's like a 5/5, it's a 6/6 or whatever. You are super happy to just play Disciple Freyalise, draw 5 or 6 cards. Also gains life too to offset all the pinging that's happening. So I consider that like I would hold on to this card. I'd rather hold on to this card than actually play it as a land. So that's why I want a higher land count. And then also fight spells. Again, the Nazguls are very, very big. The fight spells are incredibly efficient with them too. So why not up your interaction count by running like County Ambush and Bridgeworks Battles? Like it's good. It's just really good when you have giant big creatures almost always on the
we'll save that for the MDFC section, Tomer, because we're gonna go to the MDFCs. Okay, but that doesn't even make any sense because Seth and I also loaded up on MDFCs.
That is true. We just played like 4 lands.
We just cut all of our
lanes for them. Yeah, I'd rather hold on to my County Ambush. That's what I'm talking about. I'm counting them as spells rather most of them as spells.
Why not just play
lands.
Why not play a good fight spell then? Why play a bad one? If you just want the fight spell, just play a good one.
Because they're
play Spray Pod or whatever, right?
Because what if I need a lane drop? Like, obviously.
Okay. We're gonna go through category by category. Okay, so first is fetches. Everyone but Tomer just had 1 Verdant Catacombs. Tomer with the 4 fetches. And I think you hinted on this. You wanted to fetch the turn 1 forest for the mana dork. So you have more fetches. Seems reasonable. There's more green fetches you can add. So currently we have 4, but you can add like Misty Rainforest and things like that. Okay, shocks is simple. There's only 1 shock. We all play the Surveil land. Original deck list does not have Surveil Land, but that could just be because it's, like it's a new card. 3 color lands. So Command Tower, everyone put Command Tower, but Tomer's City of Brass and Mana Confluence Believer.
Yeah.
No.
I don't
Play
want to put it in.
Just play Misty Rainforest.
I don't want to put it in, but you all sucked me in with the stupid Field of the Dead lines and whatever. And I want to keep. I wanted to keep at least. I want to have the 90% chance Lane of War on turn 1. So with 9, the only reason why they're there is so I can get 19 untapped green sources on turn 1. And then I get my 90% ratio, and I'm happy.
And you can keep Field of the Dead online, right?
Because and you can still do your Field of the Dead.
You can't just keep slamming forests in here.
Is it?
It still has all the nonsense.
No. Isn't the fetch just better, though? Especially in the Field of the Dead deck, where you're playing a snow-covered forest and a non-snow-covered forest and an Overgrown Doom, and the original deck has a Bayou. So there's many fetchable lands. So I think that Misty Rainforest is just like strictly better than Cavern.
None of us kept the Bayou, though. If we're allowed Bayou...
Okay, well, that was just budget reasons. We don't normally put it in. You would put the Bayou in here, like if you had.
Assuming the builder of this deck already owns a Bayou, then yes, okay, fine, we would keep it in there. But I don't own one, so
I don't think we have like 4 basics each. Like
now it gets interesting. Bounce lands. We are all bounce land believers because we all included a Golgari Rot Farm. But Tomer, your tempo, like you're talking about tempo, and then you put Golgari Rot Farm. But also, myself, Seth, and Morgan included Guildless Commons, and then Seth and I included Arid Archway as well. So we all have different tolerances for bounce lands here. Why the Rot Farm, but not the Guildless Commons, Tomer?
I mean, it's the best out of them in a vacuum, right? This one taps for 2 colors, and the other ones don't. So if you could only run one, you run that. But do I want too many tap lands? No. So I put 1 bounce land. And I wanted to, like I said, I wanted to maintain the 90% chance of turn 1 Land of War Elf, and so I kept it there. I could cut it, honestly. Like that would be fine.
But that doesn't make sense though, because it kills your turn 2 Sméagol, right? Like you play a forest on turn 1, and then you play a dork, and then your turn 2 land is a Golgari Rot Farm. So
Richard, I have 42 lands in the deck. I have 42.
If you were really
stuck with just 1 bounce land on turn 2,
that's true.
God, I hope not. God, I hope not.
That is a good argument. That is a good argument. That you have like 5 lands, and you can sequence it so that the Rot Farm doesn't wreck you.
Yeah, I think the big argument for playing more Tomer is your love of MDFCs. You're just talking about like how important Disciple of Freyalise is and how much you want to hold on to those cards. More bounce lands lets you play them as lands early, like on turn 1 to play a mana dork, so you can turn 2 Sméagol, and then still Disciple of Freyalise later in the game. So I think for me, like, I really want at least 3 bounce lands just because I play so many MDFCs, and being able to pick them up in the late game they're powerful without MDFCs, but they're incredibly powerful when you can pick up a Seagate Restoration or a Disciple of Freyalise in the late game of the bounce land. So I think 1 is just not enough for me in a deck that has a lot of MDFCs.
I think 3 is fine, but like I'm worried about too much of a good thing, Like there are points that I've seen on Commander Clash a couple times where people are just like, I can only play a bounce land. Now I move to discard and I miss my 2-drop or whatever, and that's bad. I
pick up a tap land, discard to hand size. Yeah, they can be clunky. I think 3 is the number I like the most. I think going beyond that's where I start to get a little
That's a lie, Seth. As soon as they release a 4th one, you're putting it in. I would put 4. If they gave me another one, I would add it, right? But these are the only 3. Then you're getting into like the really old ones where you have to have like a forest on the battlefield, and you have to like tap it or whatever to add it.
They're so bad.
All right, color fixing.
My only argument. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Morgan.
No more.
My only argument against also having Arid Archway is that there's a lot of low enough mana costing stuff in here that I care more about the colored pip. So like having the extra bounce land is nice, especially when you have those MDFCs and stuff like that. But you can only utilize the colorless so much. It's much better to have the colored mana. The only other argument would be Guildless Common versus Arid Archway. If the user wanted to have a little bit of a desert package, which I think they easily could, then I would play Arid Archway instead. But running both just seems a little excessive, but that's quite nitpicky. I don't think it matters that much.
Mm-hmm. All right, so color fixing. The rest of the color fixing is interesting. So the original deck ran 2, 4, 6, 8 additional color fixing. So we consider color fixing things that tap for like 2 mana. I'm running 6. Seth's running 4, 2, 4, 6, 7. Tomer 7. Morgan 7. And it's interesting what lands we chose. So we all chose Urborg and Yavimaya. And then we chose here are the good ones. The good duels are the Undergrowth Stadium. That's the Battle Bond one. I think we all put it. And then Llanowar Waste. So that's the Pain land. And then we decided different things for the rest of it, right? So there's Deathcap Glade, which I played, and Woodland Cemetery. So one of them is the slow land, and then one of them is a check land. Seth didn't even bother with these ones.
Nah,
Tomer played a Pathway and a Nurturing Peat land.
I hate Pathway.
Another Pain land. And then, Morgan, what is Jungle Hollow?
That's the gain life one.
It's the cheaty land. It's the cheaty land.
Yeah,
Did you look at this deck? It's trying to. It's like trying to kill yourself on turn 6. Like you have to. I figured it was worth the tempo hit. Like I've said that a couple tap lands. So I actually did not have Undergrowth Stadium. I think the Battle Bond lands are grossly overrated. If I'm playing a 2-color deck, and I have them lying around, because I do have some lying around, I'll throw them in my decks. But like if I'm starting from scratch, I'm not going to go out of my way to buy one, with some exceptions.
But you play Jungle Hollow? That's not right.
Balance it out, baby. Balance out the pain.
Isn't it just better than most untapped dual fixtures though? Because it's only bad if one person gets eliminated early, right?
Yeah, but I've played a lot of games where that happens. I've played a lot of games where it's like someone dies on turn 5 and then it's a slogfest for the rest of the game. So I think that's just my experience is obviously influencing that decision for me. Like that's probably not everyone's experience. Like most people are probably fine to run Overgrowth Stadium, but I would rather play Deathcap Glade over it because it will basically it's going to come in tapped turn 1, turn 2, but then for the rest of the game, it will come in untapped. You don't have the question of what's this going to do late game that Undergrowth Stadium's going to have.
I kind of feel like dual lands are just overrated in general. You don't really need that many of them. Like you need some, but if you look at an actual deck list, it's most of the time you don't need that many colored mana symbols to actually execute your turns and cast your spells. So if you can fetch out a couple of dual lands, you can get away with playing a lot of one-color utility lands and not have any issues with it.
Y'all
just
don't believe in doing
I have like 12 mana and I can generate like 4 colored pips. Right?
Richard takes it to the extreme.
Seth's mana base looks just like mine. He doesn't believe in pips
it kind of
either. This deck doesn't have that many pips. There's like a Villas, which is like triple black pips, a Beseech to Mirror, but like you're not like playing stuff that needs like 4, 6 pips. Like you're not trying to curve them back to back. And you have Mana Dorks and you have Urborg and Yavimaya to kind of like magically fix everything. So I think in general, Commander players like overly fix like their mana, like the pips they can make, and then they put the number of lands in their deck. Whereas in Commander, I feel just the raw amount of mana you can generate is most important versus like the pips. And like Krim is not here, but I guarantee you Krim and his other color fixing would have like 13 cards in there. He like unironically plays the gain lands, the searchable types, like in a 2-color deck, he can like go like triple white into like quad black or something on curve, like no problem. And I feel that's overkill. Like most decks don't need this. And even Sméagol has 2 pips in the cost. Like doesn't matter. Like, you don't need like this level of fixing. So yeah, that's an interesting
Quick pause.
thing. Tomer, is your roller coaster ride over, Tomer?
My light fell and it hit my camera off, and now I need to 1 second. 1 second.
We get a little tour of Tomer's apartment almost as the camera swings around.
Wait.
All right. So as Tomer fixes it, we start getting into the saucy category, and this is where I think Clash mana bases differ from the normal mana base. So spell and utility lands. So what do we do when we cut all the color fixing and all the basics? We shove them full of another deck. Like here's a deck's worth of action for you. So the original deck had 1 spell land, which is Boseiju. Morgan has 4 spell lands. The rest of us have this tome, which I can't even count, like 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, like 9 each. Okay, and it's like all of the MDFCs, right? It's the Kamigawa utility land, so Boseiju Takenuma, and then we have the original MDFCs like Agadeem's Awakening in there, Malakir Rebirth, Balagan Recovery, and then we start getting into the more custom ones. So like I have revitalizing Repass, which is the thing that gives a +1/+1 counter and indestructible. Tangled Florahedron. If you're going all in on mana dorks, you might as well play the mana dork MDFC, right? Like, so I really like that one. Seth and Tomer have the spot removal ones, I think. Fel the Profane. I looked at the original list. There's a lot of spot removal in it, so I cut the spot removal MDFCs out of my mana base to try to add more untapped lands and basics, because they actually run a lot of like spot removal in their like main spell slots.
I feel like you'd take it out even if they had no spot removal, though.
No, if they had
zero, like number one hater.
Miser, Fel the Profane in there, you know.
Okay.
I will say though, like, because we increase the number of lands in the deck, I think this is one of the easiest ways to do that. Is like you play a couple of the removal MDFCs, and then you can cut a couple of the non-MDFC removal spells to help get your land count up to like 36 or 37 instead of 34. So a little way to cheat on that a bit.
Yeah, and I think the reason mine is so low is because of how I view MDFCs. Like, I only have 2 currently, but you could probably run more. Like Disciple of Freyalise, I just kind of forgot about that one. That's a great include. There's several others you can make the argument for, but I didn't want to go gun-ho adding a bunch of MDFCs because I don't count them as a full land. I keep them as kind of a flex slot, right? If I have like maybe 2 or 3 MDFCs, I'll count that as a land. I would rather play synergistic MDFCs. I don't want to just play all of the MDFCs in my color. I want to play ones that actually go along with the theme of my deck. So I don't play as many as a lot of the Clash guys do, but I also, I do like them. I just, since we're not making changes to the actual 99 of the deck outside of the lands, I didn't want to go throw in a bunch of MDFCs.
Yeah, I agree. No Zoff consumption for you, Morgan.
There's no Zoff consumption for anyone.
Great yeah.
I'm actually disappointed that no one plays Zoff consumption.
I do want to shout out one MDFC that I think, 3 of us added, and I think is like particularly strong in this deck. It's Malakir Rebirth. Yep. It's 1 mana, black, instant. You lose 2 life, and then if the target creature, if it dies this turn, then it enters the battlefield again tapped. I think this card is really good because you can use it both offensively and defensively. This is a sacrifice deck, and you usually have like a bunch of Nazguls laying around, and they have a powerful enter the battlefield trigger if the ring tempts you. So you can, purposely sacrifice one of them and then get it back with Malakir Rebirth and pump up your entire team. That's like one way of getting the ring tempt to you and growing your army at the same time. And you could also use it defensively because like your number one thing that you want to be protecting is Sméagol. Sméagol is the engine of the deck. And this is a very cheap way of making sure Sméagol survives a lot of forms of removal, at least. And yeah, I like that. I see that we all were on board on that, most of us.
Well, yeah, I had to play the Bogart Trawler instead. Gotta have that graveyard hate and be a responsible gamer.
Add that one. That's one good 2/2 because like it's removal when you need it, and then also it's a body that you can sacrifice. So I actually think that was a good one that I forgot to add.
And also if you're filling people's graveyards, if there's a graveyard deck at the table, you might want to like, oh, thanks for the land. Okay, bye.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's even better in Sméagol because you might be helping someone as, the kind of the sort of body and mind problem. So I think Graveyard Hate's even more important if you're like milling your opponents. Mm-hmm. But I probably should have played the other one too, Malakir Rebirth, because that does seem good in the deck. I might cut the Undergrowth Stadium and go down to 3 actual dual lands and add in another MDFC.
If I'm not happy playing this card, I cut it even if it's an MDFC. So I am never happy casting a Bogart Trawler. Like, even if they're a graveyard deck, I'm like, I don't want to spend my whole turn like doing this. Like, same with like Cowley Ambush. I'm like why? I'm not pleased with this, right? So I'd rather just put literally anything else and save the life, especially something like Cowley Ambush that comes into play tapped, right? Like I'd rather just play an untapped land. The 3 life lands are more forgiving, but it's still 3 life. Like, we're just nitpicking about like mana confluence, and then we're here like shocking, like lightning bolting our faces with like all these MDFCs, right? Like the life matters.
That's
so
true.
I don't consider it like zero cost anymore. Like 5 years ago, MDFCs were zero cost, but now our lands are so good. I'm already down to 3 basics. Like I have to make room. Otherwise, Zoth consumption would be here, right? But it was on the chopping block for me. It was on the chopping block. It had to get cut. Utility lands is also another interesting one. Original deck had Shizo, and I couldn't figure out why. Shizo gives a legendary fear, and that's basically any creature in the deck because they have the ring tempts you, right? So they can turn anything legendary. But I'm like, you hit him with one Nazgul. Like I don't know what we're trying to do with the Shizo that makes it worth the slot. So that one I don't understand.
I think it's fine though, because it's like untapped and it makes colored mana, right? So the cost of playing it's pretty low.
It's
I
not
didn't
green.
actually play it, but well, I guess that's true. It does kind of blow up the mana dork theory, but I feel like those lands are a little bit underrated, even though they're not super strong. The fact that they come into play untapped and make like colored mana makes it pretty easy to play them. So I really don't mind that. I didn't play it, but I don't think it's that bad, really.
I think that this idea is to just put up a Nazgul, but I feel like that's not strong enough in my opinion for it to be worth a slot when there's so much competition.
So Morgan is super conservative here, but he has an interesting choice in here. He has a Baron Moor. And is Tranquil Ticket the same? I don't even know what Tranquil Ticket is.
Yeah,
those
that's
two
the green,
It's the
cycling
green
lands?
one. It's the green one, yeah.
Why the cycling lands?
If you're stealing lands off of your opponents, which guarantees you're still having mana, then you could take the risk to spend the 1 mana to spin into more gas, especially if you have multiple lands in hand. Also, the card draw in the deck was on the lighter side. I mean, it has cards like the One Ring, which are extremely explosive card draw, but you have to creep your way up to that. So I figured it checked a couple boxes, and then if you really need it as a land, it taps for a color at least.
I will say,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Tomer.
No, I was gonna just say like Morgan doesn't count MDFCs as lands, but this 39 lands to MDFCs, I think cycling lands make more sense there because you're just gonna see more lands. So cycling them away is okay.
I know this card's banned in our Commander Clash play group, but seeing how this deck is built with like Archdruid's Charm and crop rotation, it kind of hurt my soul to not see a Glacial Chasm like in the original list. Like if you're playing those instant speed land tutors, that card is so incredibly busted.
Hate it. Yeah.
The three of us have
It's just kind of unfun to play against, though.
Oh,
like
it's brutal.
That's a good reason to not have it in the original.
That's why every single red deck of mine has insult to injury in it. And now you Isengard Unleash, I'm just so tired of losing to Glacial Chasm. Like
why no Mazavith? Because you can also crop rotation into a Mazavith, and the deck also we've all put both land fixing cards, so Yavimaya and Urborg, into our decks.
Because I like casting spells on turns 1, 2, and 3, Richard.
But you have 5 lands, Tomer. You sequence them in the right order.
But
but that doesn't help you if you have it in your early game, right?
Yeah.
If you have it early game and you don't draw other lands, that doesn't help. Then you're just stuck with it. I probably should play Maze of Ith more than I do, but it actually rarely makes the cut for me, if I'm being honest.
I don't play Maze that much because I know Richard's going to play it, and I just play Vesuva Thespian Sage every game. So if I need it, I figure I can snipe it from Richard at some point.
This is a free Maze of Ith because you have the 2 fixings. I'll play Maze of Ith in like a Boros deck that has no fixing, right? But I'll count it more as a spell. But in a deck that can run both Yavimaya and Urborg, I feel it's free, and especially since you can crop rotation it out to like fade and attack. I really like it. Reliquary Tower, just Seth and I, we just always. So I remember we had a podcast where we're like, you know what, Reliquary Tower is overrated, but then and then like 2024 happened, and we're like, every game I have like 30 cards in hand, and if whoever the one that loses, so everyone can draw 30 cards, but the person that loses is the one that discards the hand size. So whoever did not draw the Reliquary Tower is the one that loses. I feel you put Reliquary Tower in every deck now because every deck can draw such an explosive amount. The One Ring, if you're playing Disciple of Fraelis or whatever, like the cost is so low. It's like an untapped colorless land. I think you got to run it, no?
I need a reason not to play it now. It used to be that I would look at my deck list and I'd be like, oh, this deck draws a lot of cards, so I guess I'll play Reliquary Tower. Now my default is put Reliquary Tower in the deck, and if I look at my list and I'm like, I'm not going to draw that many cards, maybe I cut it sometime. So that's how it's kind of shifted for me. But really, I have a package. I don't know, you guys probably have this too. For me, it's like Thespian Sage Vesuva, Strip Mine, Urza's Cave, and Reliquary Tower. Those 5, pretty much regardless of the deck, are going to be the first 5 lands I put in my deck every time.
I'm
like 5 color, 1 color, like so it's made the cut on my like ultra stable land list.
I will not put Reliquary Tower in graveyard heavy decks, cards that you actually want to discard and it's like a benefit. I was looking at this list and there's not actually that much of it. Like the main payoff is like Rise of the Dark Realms, but like that's a little bit too Christmas landy and you don't really need it. Really need that to be justified. It's not really a graveyard deck from my cursory glance at least, and I think it's okay. But again, it's another colorless land, and the deck. My take on the land base
strategy. You want to draw cards and discard to hand size as part of your main strategy.
It's fine, but again, like I've been the mana base, at least the one that I'm doing, is like trying to do so many things. It's trying to like play Field of Dead, Vesuva, Thespian Stage, and then all these like MDFCs, and also all these other like mana fixing lands. And I just ran out of room, and that's the one that I left out.
All right. We're going at a snail's pace. We got another deck to get to. So we're going to skip over synergy lands. We have things like Phyrexian Tower. We have like sack outlets in here, which seem pretty standard. The interesting one is the soul lands. We all run coffers. Original list doesn't run coffers. Coffers generates no mana. So unless you have an Urborg or Yavimaya in the battlefield. So it's interesting we all landed on that. And then Tova and I had the Temple of the False God sitting in here too. You guys, you don't believe in it?
Never.
Oh my goodness.
If there was more, I should play it. I won't play it. Yeah.
if it's specifically like go hard on land ramp, I'm like, okay, yeah, Temple's fine. This deck is not that. There's a lot of the ramp is coming from your mana dorks and such. Yes. So it doesn't seem worth the risk.
Y'all poo-pooed the turn 2 Sméagol, but this is literally why. Like, it pushes you so far ahead, and that means your Temple of the False God gets online even earlier. Like, if you're rampant growth being on turn 3 every single turn for the rest of the game.
Well, the deck is not, though. It's running mana dorks.
Yes, but
I even include it here because
every single turn.
You can play it on turn 3, 4, and have it be a non-land, and it's still worth. Right? Because you lose mana on that turn, you lose mana on the turn after, and then when you hit your 5th mana, you spring ahead 2. So you lose 2 mana, gain an additional. Guess what that is? That's called rampant growth. Right? So like it's even not that bad when you're just like missing the land drops or whatever, right? So you really need to be super screwed where you have like 3 lands in hand and you never see like the 4th or 5th land. Right,
Richard's
but
convincing me to take it out. Actually,
wow,
Richard, please. Richard's convincing me to take it out.
I mean, this would be the deck if you're not a believer because you're not ramping. Right, this is a mana dork deck. This is a mana dork deck. So if you're on the fence about Temple, this is the deck to take it out from. Right, there is no actual land ramp. Oh, I guess that's
literally ramping.
The commander ability ramps.
Yes!
That requires you to tempt with the ring. Can you tempt with the ring without mana because you're holding your Temple of the False God?
So I think that the reason that the original list runs 34 lands, other than the fact that people are probably too friendly with mulligan rules and they're like, I can run less lands, play more exciting cards. Other than that, I think it's because they think they're going to be able to steal lands from their opponents. But why rely on that? Why just assume no one's going to remove your commander? Why assume that it's always going to go as planned? So, yeah, that just doesn't seem worth.
It's also like
on. Like one Dranic Magistrate and it's done.
Like, right? Don't treat Sméagol as your land drop. Treat Sméagol as extra mana, right? And you should be playing a land and triggering Sméagol. That's the ideal of this deck. And then you can power out your big spells. Like the deck runs in Garrick's Wake, which is like a fine board wipe if you have a ton of mana. But if you're not like playing a land every single turn and ramping with Sméagol, then paying 9 mana for a board wipe is a little bit too much, So I that's why I'm also team like play a land drop every single turn, regardless of what your commander.
And now we're gonna go to the greatest anime betrayal of all time. Okay, so original deck, 13 basics. My deck, 3 basics, as expected. Seth's deck, 4 basics. You got to get that Feel the Dead online, right?
You gotta, full
Tomer, 4 basics. Is there a typo here? I don't
Tomer,
know.
come on, man.
Morgan,
Tomer.
Morgan with the 9th. No, what is it? 14 basics.
Okay.
What happened, Tomer?
It's
Where'd
a
the
two-color
basics
deck.
go?
Yo, I'm on board. I'm team basics, but like I'm building the lands. I'm not building the deck in itself. And if the deck has one basic land synergy card, which is Sakura Tribe Elder, you don't need that many basics. There's not that much payoff. Like unless you're in a meta that is like super ruination heavy, which is not our meta and is not most people's meta, then yeah, you don't need that many basics unless you run synergies. If I built the deck from scratch, you betcha I would have a lot more reasons to run more basics. But I didn't. So I'm trying to optimize for this person's deck. I'm not trying to, I don't know, make my own basic land counts or make my own land base and then just throw it off to some random stranger and hope, they take the advantage of it,
Honestly, though, if you were building this deck, how would it look differently that would necessitate so many more basic lands? Like, are you cutting all the mana dorks and I don't believe in the mana dork thing, so I'm going to be a rampant growth deck, or
so you can't run rampant growth.
How would it look different in Tomer world? I'm actually curious. Like what cards would you play to necessitate the basics?
Well, for example, I would add even more. I would add even more mana dorks, and then I could run a card like I forget the name. It's like the Amonkhet one where you ramp equal to the number of tapped creatures. Yes, that one you don't actually have to attack with. You just have tapped creatures, right? So that works actually incredibly well with your mana dorks. And then also there's like another one. It's like an enchantment that you can sacrifice a creature and then rampant growth, and you get a basic land out of it. That will trigger Sméagol. That will get the ring tempts you and get another land. So there's more synergy potential here that happens to deal with basics, and it doesn't have to be just like rampant growth and stuff that's like very blasé. You can find synergy options that also rampant growth and also are very powerful in the context of Sméagol. Basics are fun and they're good. I'll have a video coming out on it.
What Tomer has said, so there's I don't know, 10, 20 basic payoff cards in Golgari. Most people will not be running that full package. So what Tomer's essentially saying is that Richard is right. You run no basics, right?
What?
Unless your deck is jam-packed of those payoffs, you don't need a reason to run basics. So running basics for the sake of Blood Moon or Ruination is futile. Right? Only if you're running all of these super heavy basic cards, which most people do not run. Do you need that many basics? No? Is that what you just said?
That's literally not what I said. I said I run basics because I put synergy payoffs, and I think the synergy payoffs are worth running basics.
Most people do not run all those synergy payoffs, Tomer.
Then they don't have to run the basics.
They should not put the basics in, right?
But in the specific examples that Tomer gave, those are probably synergistic pieces that actually up the overall power level of this deck, which makes it worth it.
I think that's an interesting question, though.
But that was off the top of my head.
Does a harvest season that can potentially ramp a bunch of lands, one card in your 99, does that improve your deck over in the long run compared to having access to 10 more utility lands that you're going to draw more regularly throughout your games? I actually think maybe the problem is we're debating the wrong thing. Maybe the issue isn't that we disagree on basics, it's that we disagree on the power of the cards that make you play basics. That might actually be where our disagreement is. It seems like we kind of agree about basics, but Tomer thinks that the basic land payoffs are way more powerful than I do or you do.
Yes.
I think that might actually be the difference.
The question is this random utility land better than not running these basic ramp packages? And I would argue in many decks that having more basic lands will actually be more powerful than running random utility cards.
Just not
we've heard Tomer, but Morgan.
This deck doesn't have any payoffs.
Yeah.
That's Steve.
14 basics, no payoffs. Do you agree with Tomer's assessment? Why do you run 14 basics?
I mostly agree with Tomer's assessment. The only other thing I would add is it would probably, the final list, if I were to build the whole deck from scratch, might have a couple less, because we could, like I said, I view MDFCs differently than you guys do. So I would probably end up with maybe one or two less, but they always come into play untapped, and they always tap for your colors. And we keep using the argument for Urborg and Yavimaya, which I think is kind of silly. You're not always going to draw it. You're not always going to draw one of your tutors for it. So relying on those, which is also, I should have said this earlier, I almost didn't add Cabal Coffers to my final list. I just figured that I was going to end up with enough actual swamps that even if I don't find the Urborg, it still is probably worth it. So
Coffers is super greedy in this list, especially
it is.
the turn one dork. I'm surprised we all put it here. I'm not surprised that I put it here, but Tomer and Morgan.
I'm with Morgan on this. Like, the deck runs 5 ways of finding coffers. So imagine there's 6 copies of coffers, and you need to find the Urborg. If you have the coffers and it's sitting in your hand, it's literally doing nothing in this deck. In all of our decks, it's doing basically nothing. Morgan might tap for like 1 mana eventually, but like it's not looking good, you know? Unless you find the Urborg. But then you also like need those suitors to find your Field of the Dead, because what is the whole point of all these other lands for, if not to find the Field of the Dead and stuff? So it's like, I don't know. It's a bit of a stretch, and it feels really scary. Especially
and
like
Tomer made fun of me on Twitter for this, but this is a Sméagol deck, and you know what that means? We can play the really cool full art basics from Lord of the Rings, right? So more basics, baby.
That's true.
The funny thing is, this conversation is part of why I don't play more basics, because when I hear this conversation about needing to like turn on my coffers, my first thought is, that's why I need to play like Open the Way and play all these cards that are putting non-basics
Open the Way's
play
random
from my deck as my
random
spell. But it's more shots at me hitting my Urborg and more shots at me hitting my Cabal Coffers. So rather than being like, oh, I should be playing Harvest Season, my first thought is, oh, I should just be playing more of these cards that are gonna like give me shots to find like my most powerful non-basics.
See, I'd rather be like drawing. I'd rather be getting my engines online, drawing cards, making extra lane drops with ramp and stuff in the early games, rather than like having like this disaster of turns 1 and 2 and 3 where I can't cast my spells because they're all colorless lanes or they don't tap for mana or anything, and then eventually they'll get resolved and everything like that. Like, you could make a deck work like that if it's like heavy on board wipes and stuff, but like I don't play like that. Like, I play tempo. I try to get my engines online early. I try to get my ramp early, my card draw early and stuff, so that when the board wipe does come, I can already rebuild really fast, faster than everybody else. And that's like how I play. But like that means I have to cast spells on turns 1, 2, and 3. And like having a Cabal Coffers that doesn't tap for mana doesn't let you do that until like much later, until you find the Urborg, you know?
I think I'm a lot more accepting of doing nothing over the first couple turns of a game. Like, I am more than happy with like playing the, whatever, the tap land.
That's why
or the
I was
coffers,
okay with having a couple of the tap lands. Like, I think the tempo hit early game in Commander on a casual level is not that big of a deal.
So I read a comment that basically said something along the lines of like, Richard has more risk tolerance to his mana base, right? Like, I'm accepting that sometimes the mana is just like whack and like it doesn't work out and then you're dead, right? And I feel people are overly safe with their mana, like super safe, right? Like, so for example, it's like, say you put 40 lands in your deck and then you play a game, you're mana screwed, right? And you're like, wow, ridiculous. Let me put another 20 forests in my deck. So now I have 60 lands. I feel that's how most people are playing, right? Like, maybe 1 in 10 games, your mana like blows up and does nothing. But 9 out of 10, you're like +3 lands and 2 spells on top of everyone else. I feel it's not like I'm like literally rolling the dice every game, right? It's just like some amount of time I have to struggle to put my mana together, but it usually works out, right? And I feel people should take that mindset more often, because you always remember that one game where Temple of the False God like totally screws you up, right? Like you totally can't get the 3rd mana, you miss the next 4 land drops, and then it sticks in your head. But then the other 7 games, you just ramp for free and like destroyed the table or did your combo or whatever, and you're like, yeah, the deck did its thing, whatever, right? So I don't know. I feel most people are overly safe. I feel basics are overly safe. Like, I am a true believer that your mana is like 4 pips, 10 colorless, right? Like that is how your deck should function. And like 95% of decks, it will work like that, right? The only time it doesn't is like if you're trying to like cast 2 different ultimatums in 5C or something, right? Then you might need to do something weird. But I would argue your deck is stronger if you just cut those ultimatums and then put in the richer mana base and do other things with those cards, right? But yeah,
doesn't that logic apply the exact same way for me too? If everybody was like saying, "Oh, turn 2 Sméagol is like that's silly, you don't need to do it. That's not really relevant. What if it dies or something like that?" But like, okay, I land the turn 2 Sméagol, turn 3, I play my Nazgul or I play a creature and sacrifice it or whatever like that, and I start ramping every single turn. From turn 3, I play an additional land. Turn 4, I ramp out additional land. 5, 6, 7. And I get away with it. Like, okay, you board wipe me, and now I have all the mana in the world to recast Sméagol, do whatever I want. If I have a card draw engine online by turn 3 or whatever before the board wipe, I'm chilling, I'm having a blast. Yeah. And like, yeah, okay, you could get hurt, right? Like, what if I played a turn 2 Sméagol and then somebody like swords it, Then I'm really sad. Then my entire game plan is like in the poopers, but like, that's gonna happen, Sometimes that will happen, but like the payoff is huge. And like I more rely and care about like not the lands holding up all the value, but like the spells holding up the value, specifically the commander.
I think there's like an interesting balancing act. I actually do agree with you about like the Sméagol thing in this deck, mostly because of the Nazguls. And I think like turn 2 Sméagol into turn 3 Nazgul is like, since you have 9 Nazguls, that's like what you're trying to do with the deck, and it's worth doing. But I do think there's got to be a balancing act, because you could also say, well, like, I should just like spew my entire hand on the battlefield and hope no one has a Wrath. And if no one has a Wrath, I like took the risk and it paid off and I won the game. But then if you do get Wrath, and you do that consistently over the long run, you're gonna end up losing a lot more than you win. So I think there's like it's a tough line to walk sometimes, trying to figure out how much risk you should take on in a game of Magic.
Gotta add more card draw. That's the way it works.
That's a solution to all
your hand, draw more cards.
I agree.
Your hand, draw more cards. Your hand, draw more.
So there's an interesting category here, which is creature lands, and nobody played a creature land except Morgan. Restless Cottage. Why Restless Cottage? And do you run more creature lands? Because if anything, one would think creature lands are good for synergy here, right? Because you can fire up the land and then sack it or whatever for the ring tempts you. Or attack with it.
You can't do that.
Block combat, but whatever, right? The creature lands are stronger than normal in this deck because it relies, it's an aristocracy deck, right? So what do you guys think of creature lands?
So this is the second card that I added just to negate how painful this deck is, because it makes food tokens. But honestly, I think the Restless Cycle in general has very much impressed me. I've put these in quite a few of my 2-color decks at this point. They are overperformers. I mean, yes, they always enter they always enter tapped minus any shenanigans, but they are gonna color fix you for the rest of the game. And then they're pretty efficient bodies. Like this one's a 4/4. Like that's a decent body, and it's gonna make a food token and give a little bit of graveyard hate, which is nice since you're milling your opponents, which for a lot of them will be some kind of advantage. So it kind of checked a couple boxes, really. Like I wouldn't just shove creature lands in any deck, but all of those points, and yes, you can sacrifice it after you've turned it into a creature. It checks a lot of boxes. I think it's worth it in this deck.
I feel like creature lands just miss for me so much. Like I think they're good, and I sometimes wonder if I should play them more. But I think a lot of times they're like the 39th land when I'm playing 40 or like 38 lands. Like they're right on the cusp, and then they like just barely don't make it. And I think it's gotten worse as we've gotten more like good MDFCs, because those kind of are like creature lands in a weird way. So I think I default to playing more MDFCs, and they don't make the cut. But I do think they're good, and I think maybe I should play them more often.
I wouldn't run it in my version of Sméagol, my headcanon of Sméagol, where it's like turn 2 Sméagol because it's a tap land. But I would put it in slower decks. I would put them in more control-y decks, the ones where you don't want to commit to the board too early, and you run more board wipes than usual, because these lands are going to survive basically every board wipe. And then you have pressure immediately afterwards, after the board. And I think that's very good. Like the flying one, for example, you steal the monarchy, steal the initiative or whatever after a board wipe. So if you're going for a grindier style of game, I think these are quite good. And I'm glad Morgan brought it up, because honestly, I haven't played any of the Restless Cycle yet. And it's a good reminder that I should try them again.
So there are untapped creature lands. Like I think the the Baldur's Gate ones, like Den of the Bugbear, whatever that cycle is.
Yeah.
They are sometimes untapped, yes.
They're untapped like first 2 turns.
Well, yeah, but Tomer's talking about getting the turn
for
to
turn
Sméagol,
1, yeah.
right? So like this
Yep.
is what you want, right? Or like Mutavault doesn't tap for pips for like Ink Moth Nexus, stuff like that. Having said that, I never run creature lands. I only run creature lands when there's like insane synergy with my deck. Like for example, like I played a deck with like Hatred or something, like all these weird pump spells. I would run Ink Moth Nexus, you know, just to get them, right? Like there's like some weird stuff, but in general, I feel if I'm just firing up a creature land and attacking for value, like I've already lost the game. Like I never want to be doing that. Right. And, you know, you could be like, well, you know, you could fire up the Mutavault and chump and live in another turn, do your thing. But I'm like, well, Maze of Ith does that. Right. Or like, I don't know, Kobold, was it Care Keep does that? Like there's a bunch of things that do that. But I feel creature lands were a thing of the past. When you didn't have enough utility lands to put into your deck, like you could put them in for like added value. But I feel nowadays it's like, our mana bases, like I could legit build like a 78 card mana base and then start cutting from it, right? Like there's so many possible inclusions that the creature land never makes it unless it like very specifically does something with my commander. And especially in Sméagol, like I think it's a lost cause if you have to fire up a land and then sack it or something to trigger the ring downs you. Like that's like so sus that I don't want to do that, right? Like I'd rather just put like a Locthwain or something in here. But even Locthwain, I feel, is like a lost cause. Like 4 mana, draw a card. Like I don't even like that, right? So I definitely don't like random creatures. But that's interesting. Because no one else, like Morgan still likes Restless Cottage. So I'm curious what the community's take on creature lands are. Because Wizards keeps
I wouldn't just auto
level.
include this in any Golgari deck, but I think in this one specifically, it checks enough boxes that it would be worth trying.
All right. We originally planned to do 2 decks, but we spent like literally an hour talking about Golgari. So I'm just gonna ask you a very quick question about the second deck. The second deck is a Jeskai artifact deck. Okay. And my question to you guys is, do you believe in the indestructible artifact lands? Because this is an artifact commander where artifacts matter, do you guys play the ETB tapped indestructible artifact lands? And why? Or why not?
Yes. So I play the indestructible artifact lands. I know they come into play tapped, which is a drawback, but this deck in specific is Tetsin, which wants to craft with artifacts, and that's kind of the goal, is to get 6 artifacts either in the graveyard or in the battlefield. So I feel like this is an easy way that you can up your artifact count a little bit, and the tempo hit that you take by playing a tap land is worth it in a deck like Tetsin that just needs artifacts on the battlefield. Plus, I feel like the risk is not super high with them being indestructible. I thought about playing the original Mirrodin ones that are not indestructible, that just like come into play on tap but make 1 color. Those were like the last lands I cut for this mana base. I ended up not playing them because I think the risk is very high there. But I think that being indestructible lowers the risk enough that they're worth it in a deck that really has synergies for them.
So the best argument is that they can craft with Tetsin. That's the best argument. But that puts you down lands, right? Or am I misunderstanding what craft?
No, yeah, you would have to exile. Yeah,
so you'd be going down
the
lands.
graveyard.
Sure. But then also, I've had my artifact lands farewelled too many times, guys.
Don't play
it's
scared.
happened too many times. It's not
Don't
worth
play
the
scared.
risk, man. So, yeah, between the, if you're doing it for craft, you're gonna go down the lands. That doesn't seem fun. Like there is some ramp in this deck, sure. So like maybe you'd come out fine. Like there's a lot of those artifacts that, like from Ixalan, that they flip over and boom, it's a land now. So there is a lot of that. So like maybe it wouldn't hurt as bad, but that seems really sus. And then yeah, I've had my indestructible lands farewelled way too many times.
Nah. So Tetsin is one of my paper decks. It's one of my favorite decks, actually. And I love it to death. And I run all the indestructible ones. I also run the non-indestructible ones. No fear. Run them all. The reason why is that Tetsin really wants a critical mass of artifacts. And I told you in a previous podcast that I run like 51 artifacts in my deck. And the artifact lands are a big way of doing that. Because when Tetsun's ability triggers, you look at the top 3. I think it's top 3 of your library, and you take 1 artifact. So you don't necessarily have to grab a land off it, but if there are artifact lands, if you're like a hashtag low land count believer, well, this is one way of kind of cheating around it, because if you're not drawing your lands naturally, well, you get a shot at looking at 3 more cards to hopefully find your land drop. So that's I was running 40 lands in this one, by the way, so I'm not a hashtag low land believer, but that helps with the consistency. And then if you're grabbing an artifact and you're putting artifacts, those lands into your graveyard, then they're craft fodder. And it's not just Tetsun, but it's a bunch of other cards in this person's deck that have craft requirements. So it helps a bunch of cards. And yeah, you're going to lose a farewell. The spoiler alert, you're going to lose a farewell anyway. Even if you're not running a single artifact land, if you get hit by a farewell, your entire board's artifacts and all your recursions gone to poop and GG basically. So it doesn't even matter.
but then at least like you could draw more stuff to do later, right? Like it's hard for if your farewell hits your lands, that's harder to come back from. Whereas if someone farewells and you are an artifact deck or a graveyard deck or an enchantment deck, like you will draw more cards to do more things and you might be able to crawl back in. It's harder to do that if they're hitting your lands.
Sure, but like if this is like 3 indestructible lands or 6, I don't know, artifacts in general,
sure,
odds are pretty high that you're not going to lose all your lands. You're going to lose like 1, maybe 2, sure, and you'll be fine. Like it's not like you have that many spells to cast left over anyway because your entire board's gone. I don't know. You just accept farewell is gonna kill you, and then like if it's any other board wipe, if it's the Vandal Blast, who cares? There's plenty of mass artifacts, mass recursion that can just bounce you straight back into the game. It's fine. It's just farewell, and I'm not gonna play scared of farewell. You know, if I don't have a counter spell, then you got me. It's fine. I deserve it. You know, I'm an artifact deck.
So I used to debate this a lot. But after the 5th time of saying like I'm never including this in my deck, I just like don't even bother with this argument anymore, because I spend so much mana ramping, like durable ramp, right? Like I will spend like 5, 6, 7 mana just to get a land on the battlefield that will never go away. So to have like 2 or 3 of my lands ripped out from me from farewell at no cost, right? So it's not the same as someone strip mining your bounce land, because when someone does that, they're making the conscious choice to go down in mana just to like mess you up. And if they want to do that, then like you can't really dodge that. It's just like if someone just took all the creatures and turned them at you like every turn, you're like, well, that sucks, but like I can't really do anything about it. But farewell is a problem because maybe Seth has a scary board. I need to farewell, and then I take like 4 of Tomer's lands with him. Like I didn't even mean to target Tomer, but like I might as well because it's free, right? And it's more than farewell. It's like collector oof. It's card. It's Wave of Vitriol, I think. Like a bunch of things that make you sacrifice artifacts as well. So I don't think it's worth it, especially like sacking lands to like craft. I'm like, oh, it just seems so scary. So I don't
sack them.
I don't. Then they're defeating their purpose. And like usually the artifact deck has enough artifacts that you're not like so scuffed that you need your like 1 artifact from the lands. You know what I mean? Like usually your deck is like a billion artifacts, so you're not worried about this interaction. So I typically never play these artifact lands in artifact decks because
it feels
I would argue
many
it's
cards
worth it with Tetsun in specific. Like, even if you don't like it in most artifact decks, I think the fact that it like is consistently milling 3 and letting you put artifacts into your hand, like being able to snag your land drops off that just seems so powerful to me. I haven't built a Tetsun deck, but I think with Tetsun in specific, I'm sold on it. Like, I think that upside is worth the risk, even if you don't play it in other artifact decks.
And also, like, Cyber Drive Awakener, that's another 4/4 flyer attacking with. It flips your 1,000 Moose Smithy. It enables all your affinities, so your Thought Monitor comes out like a turn earlier and stuff. Like, it's so good. Trust.
Does Phil play these lands? I can't remember. Have I seen him play these? Phil always plays artifact decks, so I wonder if he plays them. I'm curious.
Yeah, I don't remember.
So never say never. Never say never on these. I have played artifact decks before with these in, but you specifically have to care about the mass amount of them. Like there's Urza, the Esper one that makes the constructs. Like a deck like that, I could see. Maybe Tetsun crosses the line to where you could maybe play him, but I don't know. It has to be something really freaking powerful in order to negate all of the risks you're taking as well, in my opinion.
Yeah. There's a lot of payoffs. At least in I'm looking at their list, but in my list, there's tons of payoffs, and it's like literally just one spell that's gonna get me. Like, okay, whatever, it's fine.
I just found Phil's Mishra deck, his like paper deck that he plays, one of his favorite ones. He is playing the Artifact lands in that one, so Phil seems to be a believer based on his Mishra deck.
Phil loses to farewell anyway, so he's just like whatever. Right? That's the Tomer. That's the Tomer attitude.
Lose the farewell. Just
all right,
last
contentious topic. We saw how many basics we ran in a 2-color deck. How many basics do we run in a 3-color deck? And I will say this deck has 2 basic payoffs. So that's Thematic Compass, which is the thing. It turns into a maze of it that's 7 lands, but you can pay 3 to search up a basic. Original Manabase had a Myriad Landscape, which requires you to have some basics, but that could change depending if you took out Myriad Landscape. But I ran 5 basics. Seth ran 2. Tomer ran 5. And then Morgan with the 11.
Heck yeah.
Okay. Tomer. Only 5?
So my paper
Again,
Tetsun
right?
list.
If I was building it.
No. I literally did build a Tetsun list, and it runs more basics.
Wait, what basic payoffs do you have in these colors? Are you running land tax? What are you running?
Archaeomancer's map is fantastic. So like, yeah, there are payoffs. Yeah. It's just not here. So you don't need to run that many. And then I'm gonna beat the drum again. But this deck really wants to turn 3 Tetsun, and casting white, red, or blue is kind of tough if you're looking at like the mana fixing on the non-land side. So you know what you need to. I went to Frank Carson again, and you know what he said? He said you need 19 white sources, 19 blue sources, 19 red sources, 36 combination sources. And then I did the math myself. I have an article. I'll link it. But so I have 23 white sources, 24 blue sources, 23 red sources, a 38 combination pair. I can do it like it's like 95% of the chance I'm getting my turn 3 Tetsun, baby. It's great. And that's what I want because the payoff is so freaking strong. So I want to get it out as
you know what the
possible.
math we need is? If you turn 3 Tetsun, what left is in your hand to actually like power your commander out? Like,
that's
the biggest problem with an early commander is then you're gonna spend the next turn drawing cards or ramping or something, and then you just left your commander exposed for a turn, like for no reason. Right? Like usually I don't have the God hand where I have like all my payoffs, sufficient mana, and my commander. You know what I mean? Like you usually need to like ramp a little, draw a little cards, maybe tutor once or twice, and then you have the thingy, right? Now you can play your commander, slap the payoffs down, do the thing, right? So how many times do you actually just curve out and do the thing, man? That's like crazy.
All you do is you play turns to turn 3, then turn 4, you just play like a DFC artifact. Just any of them. The deck is literally, that's all the 99 is DFC artifacts. So you play 1, and then maybe you play 2. I don't know if you have like a 1-drop one, and then you just do that every single turn. But you want to get that started as quickly as possible because you're like a graveyard deck and you're an artifact deck. So you want to get that going. You want to get that self-milling and card draw going. Yeah.
And then last question for Tomer. How many basics is your paper Tetsun deck?
Oh, I don't have to look it up.
Roughly? And like,
I think it's like
6. Don't tell me 6. That's just +1 here. It's got to be way more.
Right? Tats. I'm popping it up. Hold up. Loading. So 4 islands, 2 mountains, 3 planes. So that's 9 basics. All right.
So is that scary to cast Tetsun? Because Tetsun is 1 of each pip, right?
Yeah.
So if you draw a basic, isn't that like super sketch that you might not cast your commander on curve if that's what you care about? Like, I would run less basics if I cared so much about my commander on curve. Do you think that's a valid argument, or?
But you still have like Belwar Stone and Arcane Signets, like stuff that also helps mana fix. This list does not run those, but like you could run additional mana fixing on turn 2, and then it helps it. I did the math on mine too, Rich. Don't worry.
Oh, you did the math. Oh yeah, you did the math.
Of course I did. If I'm doing it for random people,
intimately
of course
familiar with
me.
Tomer's entire deck catalog.
I have like a big spreadsheet like behind me, and it's like all these like it's like the Always Sunny meme, and it's just like everything, all the basic lane counts and everything. And Frank Carson just right in the middle. I have a statue of Frank Carson I pray to every single time for the RNG gods, you know. And that's how it works.
All right. Any closing comments? What do we think about our mana bases? Did we learn anything other than Tomer plays way less mana basics than he leads us to believe?
The only other thing I would say about me running 11 basics here is that it's an artifact deck. You got a lot of colorless pips, so it's not going to actually hurt you as bad as some decks.
The only other thing I'd say is you also got to remember, if you're watching this, that we're doing Commander Clash. It's like content stuff. I think these mana bases are good. I'm very happy with my mana base and think that they're very powerful, but I also know they're not necessarily very budget friendly. And if I was trying to like build these decks for paper all the time, am I going to be playing like Volrath Stronghold and these other like one-off utility lands that are ridiculously expensive? Not in all of my decks. So part of it's a content thing. So if you don't have the money to like get all these lands or build this exact mana base, don't worry about it.
Yeah,
we need a budget episode of Commander Clash this season just to see, like, do we start adding all these weird creature lands just to get value out of our mana base? Like, you know, there's a bunch of cards that are like 25 cents, 50 cents that we normally don't play because they don't make the cut. But I wonder, once we get a strict budget, if we just play like 10 islands, 10 forests, or whatever, call it a day, or do you start squeezing these weird cards that we no longer play? Like there's so many utility lands. Like Wizards keeps printing them, and a lot of the ones that have fallen out of favor due to MDFCs and stuff are like super cheap. So we should try that.
Yeah.
We should try
that.
That
could be fun.
Well,
I'd
like,
be down for that.
Richard, I have a question for you. If you build a no, I actually know the answer. If you build like a monocolored deck, how many like basics would you run now? In a post-ruination world.
Maybe I can find the screenshot, but I was playing a monocolor. It was the Gissa deck, actually. It ran 8 basics. But I actually looked at the mana base, and I'm like, I don't think I generate enough colored pips. So I had to pull out the hypergeometric calculator to see if I generate enough black pips in my monocolor deck to like function. Like, that's how far I'm willing to take it, right? Because it's like, oh, there's so many colorless utility lands, and you really need like 3 black pips, right? But the thing is, you need them on like the early turns, right? So you need to do that math. But like endgame, like I tell you, like I'm always 4 pips, 20 colorless mana, and that's the perfect Richard mana base, right? Like,
how do you always draw the early pips then?
you fetch. Like, the fetch land fixes everything, right? Or I'm not afraid to run a tutor and tutor out my lands. Like, people the YouTube comments always die whenever I tutor up a land, and I'm like, what do you think the tutor's there for? Right? Like, the tutor is to fix my hand, and if my hand is lacking lands, then I'm gonna tutor for land. If it's not lacking lands, then I'll tutor for gas, right? But if the tutor functions,
you don't have a tutor. Okay.
Well, then don't play blue.
Green gets more greedy because you can tutor up when you need to fix it, but when you play other colors, then you become, you got to be more defensive. But I'm playing 3 islands just for Mystic Sanctuary, right? The island count is a little low, so I'm running more basics than I normally would to try to help the Mystic Sanctuary. But then I accept that Mystic Sanctuary is only up like 70% of the time, 60% of the time, right? I'd rather take that odds than removing Mystic Sanctuary and putting like 10 basics in my deck for whatever reason, right? Like, I'm fine with that. All right. So those are our mana bases. I am curious if you have ample time on your hands and would like to build a Golgari mana base, please link it below. I'm curious what the average person is. I know when we look outside of our mana bases, people run a lot less lands than normal. I know, like, sometimes people are like fetch light because they're working with a budget. Like, that's understandable, right? But then sometimes they have a bayou, right? And then they don't run fetches. And I'm like, why? Like, I don't know, right? Maybe they just own the bayou. So build your mana base and then explain why, right? Like, if you're working on a budget, that makes sense, right? Or you're working on, maybe you do have the fetches and bayous, but they're in your other deck, right? And then this deck, you don't want to swap cards, right? Like, those things make sense.
Let us know how many MDFCs you run. I know a lot of people don't because I looked at MDFC prices. They're like super low. So I know people don't run them as much as us, right? Because I'm like, why is this card not like $1 million? It goes in every deck. So let us know.
Except for that Super Malakir Birth is like $6.
Is it really?
What's going on? I need more of them.
It's old.
I
It's
can't
old.
put them on my budget brews
Need a reprint.
anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. And then let us know if you want this type of content. We normally shy away from this. This is like super enfranchised, like super hardcore optimizing. But we thought it was fun. So let us know what you think and what you want to see. And then we'll see you all back here next time.